We had breaking news that Senator Elizabeth Warren is calling for a probe today following a claim that Tesla and SpaceX CEO Elon Musk curbed a Ukrainian military operation aimed at Russia's Black Sea fleet last year by limiting access to SpaceX's Starlink satellite network. And this probe is the reason why we're seeing hashtag Elon Musk is a traitor trending very high on X.com. Now here's the thing, guys, I try to stay as bipartisan as I possibly can, but there's a couple of things I want to mention. Number one, this is obviously not a positive catalyst event for Tesla or Tesla stock or even Elon Musk himself. And number two, I find it very striking odd that this is what's getting chosen to really investigate rather than several other things that I believe should deserve much more investigation, such as how the handling of the wildfires in Hawaii was done, or the naked short selling that we see from a lot of hedge funds that's definitely not good, or even how $6 billion went magically missing from the government last year. I mean, there's several other things that I believe should be investigated, but with that said, I don't want to stay on this topic as there's a few other topics that I definitely want to dive into that really pertain much to what we're going to be seeing for Tesla stock going into the end of the week. Now today we saw that Apple had its annual Apple event, and if we take a look at Apple stock, we see that Apple stock pretty much capitulated downwards. Now the reason I even mention Apple stock when we're talking about Tesla is because one of the things I mentioned to the Push and Profit private group a few times already is that Apple has a huge weighting in the overall indices, right? In fact, if we take a look at the weighting in the S&P 500, we see that Apple has the highest or the largest weighting in this index. And so that means that Apple not doing well could have an impact to the overall markets. And one of the things I've shared with the Push and Profit private group last night was that historically, Apple doesn't do too well whenever they have an iPhone event. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and dive too deep into the Apple event, but one thing that we can say is that market participants clearly were not happy that Apple was just selling the same iPhone for the 5th year in a row, and this is why we saw not only Apple stock fall down, but the overall NASDAQ also falling down as well. Now this whole topic on Apple and how it impacts the market wasn't something that I just exclusively shared with the Push and Profit private group, although I went in more details with them. One of the things I have is a free weekly market pulse insight, which by the way is going to be the pinned comment in the comment section below where you guys could have access to and sign up for, where every single week I send out an email talking about what we should be paying attention to going into the market. And in last week's email, I talked about this exact day with Apple and how it most likely wasn't going to be a great day for the overall market. So if we don't want to miss out on any of those future emails from my free weekly market pulse insights, make sure to check out the pinned comment in the comment section below. But with that said, I want to go ahead and hop into my laptop and really just discuss Tesla stock in further details and talk about what are some things that we're also, seeing that's taking place. Alrighty, so we are officially in my laptop taking a look at Tesla stock, and in this video I want to cover some key economic data and events that are coming out soon, and also talk about Tesla stock from a technical perspective as well. And I believe you guys are going to want to watch this video in its entirety because you guys are going to see firsthand with your eyes something that I've been talking about for a while now in regards to Tesla. But before we even, break down Tesla, let's just actually touch back on Apple, right? And actually, I want to go a few days before and kind of go back to last Friday, right? So for those of you guys that are not part of the Push and Profit private group, you guys may have not known, I made a quick video about it, but I talked about how on September 9th, I said that some notable names to watch for today are going to be both Apple and Meta. And right here, I cut off what we talked about Meta, but I said for Apple, I'm looking into shorting the shares or getting 177.5 puts once the price is greater than 179.95. Now, I wanted to share this because pretty much that's where we had our entry to start shorting Apple on that day last Friday, and it was a great entry where we saw Apple get rejected multiple times, and then towards the end of the day we saw Apple just pretty much sell off after that entry to short at the end of the day. And so what I'm trying to say is that oftentimes I don't really like to rely solely on technical analysis. For those of you guys that are familiar with the channel, I like to break everything down and look at the market from a holistic approach by looking at several different data points, right? I don't just look at the charts. I don't just look at the fundamentals. I don't just only look at the news and the catalyst events. I look at everything in confluence, and this way it helps me get a better idea of what's going on with the overall markets. Now, I'm talking or saying this because when we actually look, I called out that trade for Friday on Apple, and we see that the next day on Monday, the next trading session, that line or that area of resistance ended up being pretty much the peak of when Apple started to rebound pretty much on Monday. Now, I talked about with the Push and Profit private group that as Apple was selling off, I sent a note right around over here that, hey, this is where we're probably going to want to look for Apple in reversal. And long behold, we saw Apple pretty much moved tremendously up, and we saw Apple again get rejected at that line. Not to give myself a pat on the back, this is not what I'm here to do. I just wanted to kind of just share with you guys that when it comes to technical analysis, yeah, it's great, but I don't rely on it. But when I do use technical analysis, it tends to be much more accurate than individuals who just flood their charts with a whole bunch of lines, because we're looking at key levels, right? So that's something I wanted to share. And then ironically, today we saw that Apple didn't even get to really hold above this line as well. Now, sticking on Apple, if we go to the NASDAQ, right, if we look at the QQQs, with Apple selling off, we also saw the overall NASDAQ sell off, as I said. Now, I'm not saying that it was only because of Apple. I mean, there's some other data that came out today. For example, if we look at the Federation for Independent Business, right, Optimism Index, we see that for August, it actually ticked downward. So a lot of small business owners are not being as optimistic as they were in the last few months. And so that was also something that could have contributed to some selling pressure for the markets. Again, we want to pay attention to everything in confluence. And so we have bad economic data. We have Apple has a huge weighting. Apple's event, people, I guess, weren't too satisfied with the updates. Although I'm not going to go into the whole details of Apple. I did like some of the things or some of the features on their new Apple Watches. I'm probably not going to buy them, but it was definitely nice to see. But let's go ahead and look at Tesla, right? So we saw Tesla push up for the day, and we saw Tesla stock pretty much sell down. Now, one of the things I wanted to really take a look at is that we're getting rejected like around this area where we've been said for a while that this has been a descending trend line for Tesla. I mean, if we go and scale back, we see that, after Tesla ran up before its earnings, it got rejected at this level after its earnings as well. And then if we actually go back further, let's go ahead and keep going back. We see that Tesla rejected in the past here as well. Again, rejected around this area, and again, rejected around this area. So, if we I should have just went on a weekly time frame so we don't do too much scrolling, right? But what we're seeing is Tesla yet again getting rejected at this area of this descending trend line. And I want to really talk about this because, in yesterday's video, I talked about how I like to buy Tesla stock in my long-term portfolio. First of all, let me clarify that I am long-term bullish on Tesla in the long term, but I also trade Tesla in the short term. I have to say this because a lot of people get confused, and I'm sorry for those that watch the channel religiously. I do have to say this over and over again, right? And so I'm bullish on Tesla in the long term, and for me personally, for Tesla in the long term, I like to buy in two places. I like to wait for Tesla to sell off aggressively, and when there's confirmation of an uptrend, that's when I like to buy in, and that's what I did exactly on the last time. And then I also said in yesterday's video that if Tesla breaks above this descending trend line, that I would add more into my long-term position. And I had a comment, and it wasn't a comment that bothered me. It was a genuine question. Someone said, why would you buy Tesla just because it breaks above this descending trend line? If it's going upwards, you always talk about Tesla, buying more when it's selling off. Why would you buy Tesla as it's running up? Well, one of the things I like to really buy is at these pivotal points where we see if Tesla would have broken this descending trend line, what does that tell me? Well, that tells me that this trend line of going downwards is broken and we're entering into a new trend. And so I would, if Tesla breaks above this area, I would love to add into my long-term portfolio. And I know you guys don't have to buy in anytime I buy in. In fact, I recommend you guys do your own due diligence and only buy into Tesla long-term whenever you see value in. You don't want to follow me or any fund manager or anyone else. None of the talking heads or under the CNBC or any other market pundits. You guys have to only invest in whatever you see value in. And so for me, I like adding in when Tesla is reversing upwards after a long sell-off and if we break into a new trend. So I just wanted to answer that because I know some individuals might have gotten confused. I did get a comment saying, why would you add more when Tesla's going up more? Well, hey, if it would have broken above, that just shows that there's a new trend being formed. And clearly, we saw that it got rejected at that area. So that's why I wait until we break above it. Not just because Tesla ran up close to it. No. right? You have to be patient, right? That's what I like to do. I like to be patient, and I like to wait for that opportunity to present itself for me. Now, let's go ahead and talk about Tesla more in the short term, right? And of course, I'll tie it back into the long term because, again, I do trade and invest in Tesla. I've been investing in Tesla since 2017. Honestly, it's been one of my best positions. But let's go ahead and talk about a couple things, right? So one of the things I've said in previous videos is that we want to look at the volume profile. And what we see in the volume profile is that there's a lot of volume relative to price around this area, right? It means that there's a lot of exchanging between buying and selling. And I religiously say this in almost all my videos because it's important to understand this, right? Again, I don't like to just draw a whole bunch of lines on a chart. I like to look at price action, but not put too much weight on it. But it is something that's interesting to watch. Is one of the things I've said is when we entered into this area, that this was going to be an area of consolidation and a pivotal moment to watch, because I said, hey, look, Tesla pushed up, then we saw Tesla push down, Tesla push up, push down, push up, push down. Why did we see Tesla go bouncing up and down so much? Well, again, there's a lot of buying and selling around here. That's why it forms areas of supports and resistances when there's lots of volume relative to price, not your typical volume relative to time. This right here that's highlighted is completely different from this, okay? And it's something that not all brokers have this, not all brokerage platforms offer this. But if you want to add this onto your chart, simply look for volume profile. That's what it's going to be called, right? Now, I said that once we either break above this area where there's lots of volume relative to price, or we broke below it, well, that's going to be interesting because there's going to be a lot more volatility and a lot more bigger swings. Why? When there's little volume relative to price and there's buying pressure or selling pressure, well, we see that move tend to be more directional. Why? Well, if there's buying pressure and there's less of an exchange of buying and selling, and so you're only getting buying pressure, that pushes up the order books, right? And so vice versa, when we broke down below this area and we started having heavy selling pressure, well, we saw that it moved. We see these big candles downwards, and then once demand came in for buyers, we saw a big candle going upwards, right? So that's something that's important to watch. And so we recently broke above it. Why? Well, we had the catalyst event that I talked about in a previous video with pretty much an analyst doing pretty much Wall Street awakening to the potential for Tesla, not just from a automotive perspective, but what Tesla could be doing in the future with its revenues as far as services, right? And also with robotics and AI. And so we saw this huge move up. But one of the things that we have to understand is that when there's, again, little volume relative to price, if there's buying pressure or selling pressure, it's going to be a huge move. And so if we take a look at Tesla today, I mean, yeah, we pushed up, but it was a huge move downwards, back again, getting rejected. Why? Well, again, we had bad economic data come out today. We had Apple's event. Apple had a huge influence on the market. And then, of course, you have those small catalyst events such as Elon Musk or Elizabeth Warren asking to probe Elon Musk and doing an investigation on him, right? So not good news. And when there's little volume relative to price, selling pressure is going to take over, and that's why we see the rejection, right? But what are some things we want to pay attention to going forward, right? Well, what do we have tomorrow? Well, I've been saying it religiously now that tomorrow, September 13th, what do we get? We get the CPI report. And this is the last, and by the way, the CPI report is an inflationary gauge. It tells us where inflation is at. And this, we have the CPI report. We also have the PCE report. But this CPI report that we're getting tomorrow is the last one that we get before we have the Federal Reserve make their decision on monetary policy, right? I've been pretty much stuck on my stance that the Feds are going to pause because they're working on lagging data, and it'd be too aggressive to either cut or hike at this moment. And so they're gonna want to evaluate what's going on. But I believe that tomorrow's CPI report is going to print a little bit higher, right? Headline CPI is going to go up. And I actually shared within the Push and Profit private group earlier today what the expectations are from a bunch of institutional or a bunch of institutions on what they believe inflation is going to look like for tomorrow's report. And pretty much the consensus is that inflation, most likely, headline inflation is going to tick upwards. Why do we believe, me along with a bunch of institutions such as JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, I mean, you name it, Citibank, all these big institutions. Why is me along with all these other institutions, or me along with all these other institutions, believing that headline inflation is going to trickle upwards? Well, you simply just have to take a look at crude oil. Now, I'm not going to pull the chart up. I've shared charts on it before, both on the channel and with the Push Your Profit private group. But what we're seeing is crude oil tick back upwards, right? And so that's why you're seeing your local gas stations. I've been saying this. Gas is pretty expensive. Not as expensive as it was in back in February of 2022, but we tapped into the oil reserves, and then we saw gas pretty much go down, which was good. But then now we're seeing gas go back up. Why? Well, we know what Russia is doing, right, as far as stifling production, as well as what the Saudis are doing, and so that's a huge concern, right? Because obviously energy is volatile, and with these different foreign countries manipulate, or not, I don't want to say manipulating, but they're purposely stifling production to increase the price. Well, that's going to cause energy to go up, and that's why we're most likely going to be seeing inflation tick upwards. And you have to understand, gas has a huge role on everything, right? Because you have to think of transportation, right? Gas prices going up means food prices also go up, because if you go to your local grocery store and you want to buy, I don't know what people buy, let's say your eggs, right? And and you want to buy your eggs, well, they have to get delivered, right? And so gas or energy has a huge importance in inflation. And so that's why tomorrow, obviously I don't have a crystal ball, neither me or any of the institutions have a crystal ball, but what we're seeing with the other data is that most likely it's going to print a little bit higher. And so what does that mean, right? So if you made it this far into the video, you're probably like, man, this guy just, he talks a lot. But it's really just to break down things that we have to understand, right? So what does it mean if we see CPI kind of trickle upwards, headline CPI, and we see energy trickle up? Well, that's not going to be seen as too well for the market, because what do we know the Federal Reserve is doing? Well, we know that Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, along with all the FOMC members, are fighting inflation, right? They want to restore price stability and also have maximum employment. But the issue is, how do they fight this? How do they try to regulate inflation? Well, they have a bunch of tools in their tool belt, and one of the tools is raising or having the federal fund rate hiked upwards, right? And so right now, if we have data showing that, hey, inflation, even though it may be temporary because it's volatile, such as energy, trickle upwards, well, even though they may pause in September, the next question is, how long are they going to keep the rates up? Because people think that, okay, a pause is just overall, just that's it, everything's done. No, right? We still have rates at an elevated level, and this affects everything, including Tesla. Like, I know when I go into these economic topics, some people, right, I see the comments. Sometimes YouTube blocks the comments automatically if people, say something impolite or use bad, profanity, right? So key tip, if you want to say anything negative on the video, don't use any profanity, because YouTube's going to delete it. If you want me to see the comments, I shouldn't be giving that advice. Let me stop. But one of the things that we have to understand is that this economic data has a huge impact on Tesla, right? Why? Well, monetary policy, it being high, is the reason why we're seeing auto loans at these high levels where, I mean, this is anecdotal, but even a cousin I had, they're paying 12% for a new car that they bought, right? And so if you have stellar credit, even with stellar credit, your auto loan is going to be around 7%. That's what stellar credit. I mean, I bought my vehicle back in 2013, and the interest rate, it's paid off now, but the interest rate I had was 13%. I mean, sorry, I said that wrong. The interest rate I had back in 2013 was 3%. Right, I got to clarify that. Back in 2013, when I financed my vehicle, it was at 3%. Now we're seeing, even with great credit, it's at 7 to 8%. Nearly almost 3 times, even if you have great credit. So imagine if you have poor credit. And so that's bad, right? That hurts the automotive industry, especially Tesla. That's why we see Tesla reducing their prices. Yeah, it's part of Tesla's mission to eventually reduce prices and make EVs affordable. But also they're doing it much more aggressively because they're trying to stir up demand. It's not necessarily a bad thing, because the idea is, okay, we'll lower prices, but we'll get more volume. And that's a benefit that Tesla has, right? Against all these other companies that are selling EV vehicles, right? Because a lot of these legacy automakers, I mean, Ford, GM, I've shared so many times on this channel, they are struggling. They are bleeding, trying to even get close to a profit. And so with Tesla reducing prices, well, now they're going to be forced to reduce their prices on their vehicles, which is going to cause them to suffer even bigger losses. So Tesla actually has an advantage in this environment. But the key thing is we don't want rates to remain elevated as they are right now. And so the question isn't, okay, yeah, they may pause. The real question is, how long are they going to keep the rates high? And so that's a concern. And so that's why tomorrow's print, if it does go up, as I expect along with all the institutions as well, that's not going to be looking too well, and that could cause for the Federal Reserve to go ahead and hold rates for a longer period of time, which is bad, okay? To put it in simple terms, it's bad. And so, again, I don't have a crystal ball. We'll have to wait for the data. Who knows? Maybe inflation will come downwards. It could shock every one of us. I could have my mouth open and shocked and just utterly surprised that inflation's tricking downwards, and that'll be good. But it's expected that, it's most likely going to trickle upwards, and this could have some volatility for the overall markets, including Tesla. So we'll have to pay attention to that. But with that said, I don't want to make this video any much more longer than it actually needs to. So with that said, make sure to watch this video right over here where I break down the 3 stages of a reversal. I think it's a great video to watch, and I'll see you guys on that next video. Take care, guys.